Great, I think we're ready. Hello everybody and welcome to the Offside Project panel. Before we get into the actual panel with three very wonderful, interesting people, I'm very excited to talk about them. We're going to be watching a couple of short interviews that I've done with Natalie Washington from Football v Transphobia and Lucy Clark from Truck, because they were very, very sweet and they couldn't manage to be here today because of the train strikes, but they were up for me giving them a little interview about what they work on and some of the sort of wider questions that we have about how to do better trans inclusion in sports widely and football more specifically. So, thank you very much.
My name is Natalie Washington. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them, and I'm the campaign lead for Football v Transphobia. Football v Transphobia is a campaign really around just making football a safer place for transgender people and non-binary people and gender non-conforming people. And that means at every level. So that's playing, refereeing, going to watch football, being involved in coaching, anything. It's about helping people to understand what is transphobia, how does transphobia stop trans people from participating in football, and making football a better place so that trans people can benefit from it, and so that football can benefit from the presence of trans people. So I think the really big topics in this space at the moment are, look, we're in the middle of a kind of a culture war, moral panic around the existence of trans people in society. So first and foremost, we have to challenge what are sometimes growing transphobic attitudes in football and in sport more generally, whether that be people that just want to go and watch their team and they don't want to hear transphobic chanting, or they don't want to hear people saying disparaging things about trans people, through to people that are playing and are facing questions about the legitimacy of their participation in whatever league or category that they're playing in, and whether that be trans women being challenged around their eligibility, or trans men challenged around their eligibility, or indeed non-binary people potentially not having a space that fits their gender at all. But then kind of linked to that is the more wide kind of growth and evolution of sort of homophobic abuse in football and misogynist abuse in football, which is all very linked, because the policing of trans people's bodies in football, for example, is very linked to the policing of cisgender women or women with sex variances in football as well. So challenging those attitudes and challenging those reductive sort of ideas around gender are really important and really linked as well, and benefits everyone. I think the reason I really love football is, so I actually got into football as a way of kind of trying to conform with the gender that I was assigned at birth, and actually realised that I really liked it, and then carried on playing it. For me, it's a place where you can kind of forget about the pressures of the day-to-day world and the challenges, and you can find community. A lot of people, they move to a new area, the first thing they do is they go find a football club to be involved in. So it's a way of finding community, a way of getting connected to people, but also around like meeting people with different backgrounds and from different life experiences and so on. It's the national sport in England. There's a lot of people that play it, and I think for me it's the being able to kind of enjoy what I can do on the football pitch, but then also enjoying the kind of the community side of it as well.
Yeah, hi, I am Lucy Clark, and I am the founder of All Things Truck, really. So that started 5.5 years ago with Trans Radio UK, because I felt that we, as a community, needed our own space on the airways. So set up Trans Radio UK. Then in 2020, I set up Truck Listens. Now the truck comes from our listeners on Trans Radio UK. Started calling us Truck. Obviously the TR, the UK. So we've kind of taken that. We thought it was pretty cool. So we set up Truck Listens, which is a listening service for people that need to talk, because we was getting a lot of people, especially during COVID times, contacting us that needed support, needed somebody to talk to. So I decided, if we're going to do this, we need to do it properly. So we set up Truck Listens. That's now got about 10 counsellors that answer the phone. pretty much throughout the day. We used to be a 24-hour service. We've had to slightly reduce that just because of the volume of calls and obviously the amount of counsellors that we had, because they're all voluntary. So yeah, it was getting a bit of a strain, but we seem to be coping quite well now with the hours that we do, and we're helping people, which is the main thing. And then when I came out as being a football referee as well in 2018, I had a lot of people contacting me saying that they wish there was a football team for them and how much they love football, etc., etc. So at that point, I'd set up teams previously. So I decided, yeah, I'll set up another football team. So in 2021, beginning of the year, we sort of set the ball rolling, so to speak, and set Truck United up. We had our first match in September of 2021. Since then, we've had numerous matches. We've played in various leagues. We've won the LGBT Sports Team of the Year. We've won the Football v Homophobia Grassroots Team of the Year. We've been listed as a big issue top 100 game changer of 2023. And we've given over 100 people the chance to play football, many of whom thought that they would never play football again. Well, I think it's really important that trans people should play sport, to be fair. Because I think not only is it great for their mental health and physical health, people need sport. Sport is something that people have done for generations. Pretty much, you can go back over 100 years. Football's been going itself for 100 years, and other sports have been going for even longer. So people need that relaxation, the physical part of it in some of the sports, and the mental part. It's great for your mental health. So, for me, my two sports would be football and golf. And when you're on the football pitch, especially, you forget about everything that's happening in and around, and in your life. So football for me was really a savior, especially when I was young. So I believe that these organisations should look at the actual facts that trans people haven't taken over in sport, and we've been allowed to play sport for many years in all sports. You've got some of these organisations now that are having knee-jerk reactions and stopping trans people from playing sport and competing in sport, which is just totally and utterly wrong. They're not looking at all the facts. We've been able to enter the Olympics for over 20 years. There's not been a trans woman that's won a medal. When we talk about football, we talk about, close to home here. There's, no trans women are playing in the Women's Super League or the Women's Championship. And yeah, hopefully there will be one day, but you shouldn't stop trans people from playing sport. I mean, the science is there. Yeah. I think it'll be amazing. I think, we will have, in years to come, there will be trans women that will play at elite level in sport. And in football as well, because there are some amazing footballers out there, and I'm pretty sure, one day there will be somebody that's flying the flag for our community in the Women's Super League or even internationally. But as I say, there's a big tournament. We're in 2023 now. There's a big tournament going on in Australia that's just started, and there's not a trans woman in sight. I'm here today. Oh my gosh, what is my favorite? Everything. I mean, God. Yeah, so I started off playing. So I think I've seen football from pretty much every angle that you could possibly have. So I played a reasonable level back in the day. I managed again at a reasonable level. I refereed again at a reasonable level, but then I've also set teams up from the bottom. I've been chairperson of a team. I've been secretary. I've been involved with leagues and the actual structures and run tournaments. So I just love there's not one bit that I can say I love about football. I guess playing when you score that goal, but then I get as much as a buzz from getting an assist. When you win is great. Every game of football that you win is great. And I've had where I've lost games, and it will, I'll be just gutted until you play the next game, until you get the W on the board, I guess. I just think just every part of it, whether you're involved in playing, in managing or refereeing, obviously I've been referee now for many years as well. And that's great as well to be involved in that way. to get to referee at some fabulous stadiums in front of lots of people. That's a real buzz. Yeah, just I think the whole shebang. I mean, as I say, for me, football kept me going. If I didn't have football when I was younger, then I very much doubt I'd be here today, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, and that even goes to supporting, you know, if I'm going to support or just watching a game, I get a buzz, and you know, I can be driving down the road and I see a set of goalposts, and I say, look, nice football pitch. You know, I'm always looking out for football pitches. It drives Avril absolutely mad that I will point out every football pitch that I see. It's just that thing. You see them goalposts, and it's just it's football. So yeah, absolutely, yeah, anything. And if you're involved in any way, shape, or form, I just think it's just such a fabulous game, and for me personally, has played a real important part of my life, and I'm loving it at the moment because we're running truck, and I'm playing for truck, and I'm managing truck, and I'm doing all the bits behind the scenes for truck. But I'm still refereeing as well, so it's great that I'm now playing, managing, and refereeing. So I've got all bases covered, as well as being the chairperson and, you know, the kit washer, absolutely everything.
Cool. I'm going to be reading a little bit off a piece of paper to begin with, so forgive me for looking down. I'll stop reading from the papers in a second. Cool. I just wanted to introduce you to the event to begin with. So we are thrilled to be hosting the Offside Project, the launch event for the Oral Histories project conducted by myself over 2022 and 2023. The Offside Project is an oral history project about transmasculine experiences in football. So over the last few months, I have had 20 interviews with various transmasc people across 8 cities in the UK, which 14 of which are currently being shown at Clay in excerpt form, and all 20 of which will be hosted in full form on the Otherness archive online, which is a trans-led archive about trans stories. Cool. I am now going to introduce our lovely panelists. So, more reading from the paper, I'm afraid. We're going to start with Ingrid, pronouns she, her. So Ingrid is from Babe World, and Babe World seeks to create a more representative art world through the creation of art, fundraising and grants and events for those who are marginalised in the arts. They have delivered various projects around football and are delighted to be working with Leeds 2023 to run the event No Home Advantage on the 12th of August for anyone who can make it, which explores what a safer space for marginalised people to watch football in Leeds looks like. We can give her a clap. Next we have Kaz. Kaz is a 27-year-old Mancunian who currently plays football for Huddersfield Town Women. As a non-binary football player in the women's game, Kaz is buzzing to be a part of the Offside Project and the developing conversation surrounding trans inclusion in sport. And lastly, Frank, pronouns he, him. Sorry, Kaz, pronouns they, them. Frank, pronouns he, him, is a grassroots level goalkeeper and organizer. He has previously played for and sat on the board of directors of alternative football club AFC Unity, and has recently played in the first ever all Transmasc 11s team with Truck, which is what Lucy Clark is running. Currently, he is part of the organizing group for Leeds' first trans and non-binary football team, and he's especially passionate about goalkeeper-specific training for trans, non-binary, and female players. Sorry, there we go. I'm really excited to have the three of you here. Each of them gives quite a unique perspective on the game of football. We've got Frank, who comes from a grassroots football playing background and has now recently set up the team that I just mentioned. Kaz, who has played professionally and semi-professionally, and of course Ingrid, who is building helping to build spaces that are intersectionally inclusive for football fans. So I'm going to start with a couple of broad questions for all three of you. First of which is, have you been watching the Women's World Cup? And how have you been finding it?
Well, yes, I have. And it's been good.
Yeah, great. Have you watched the match this morning?
Yes, yeah. I've not managed to watch much because it's on in work time, but I've been watching it at work too. So yeah, but enjoying it so far.
Cool. Brilliant.
Yeah, I've been watching what I can, mostly through like TikTok edits, going on about all the like dramas that's happening for all the different relationships on and off the pitch. So yeah, I've been seeing all that, but I've actually been working this morning, so I didn't get to catch the match. But yeah, I'm looking forward to watching the highlights later.
No, I feel awful. I haven't, but I think that's part of like a wider fatigue of watching football and things to do with football culture, where I just kind of felt a bit saturated and needed to step back from watching games at all. But I feel like this event is like reinvigorating me to, watch some games.
Thank you very much. Cool. And then another quite broad question for all three of you. How did you get into football, and what does your journey look like right now? Ingrid, you already touched on it a little bit, so let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think like quite a typical way, but I'm from a very football family. It was always expected that I would go to football matches, watch football in a pub as a kid, even if it wasn't very like age appropriate environment, and just kind of be a fan. But that was kind of contrasted with the idea that like I wasn't really ever going to be a fan, and I could never really like add anything to conversations about football because I wasn't like a middle-aged white man. So I think it was always kind of stubbornness that made me really interested in it, because I always felt that barrier of getting involved. Yeah, so I think my journey was partly through supporting my local team, which is Port Vale, because they're terrible, but also because Robbie Williams really likes them, and I really like Robbie Williams. So that's, yeah, the best reason to support a team. And then moving to London, because my family are an Arsenal family, I think there was really good opportunities to get cheap tickets through Gay Gooners. So I got to see lots of games for like 20 quid, which felt really exciting. And then, yeah, I think I definitely had a bit of a dip in terms of not feeling like even being a football fan was for me. But partly like rediscovering it through my art practice was really helpful. But also, I really credit the game FIFA with making me the fan I am, because I feel like that gave me access to football in a way that like no fan spaces had. Like I didn't get a different experience because of who I was. Like I just got to play, and I got a lot more familiar with like the rules and the leagues and the players, and I just felt a lot more knowledgeable and comfortable in football spaces after kind of putting myself through FIFA training camp. So yeah, I'm a big advocate for like football, video games or esports as an access point for people who might not be able to engage in typical ways.
Cool. Kaz, do you want to?
Yeah, I had to follow that answer. That was such a good answer. No, yeah, my whole life's kind of been football. I came from a stereotypical council estate kid lifestyle, so go play out, get muddy, come back later. But everyone who I played out with was 5-6 years older than me, and they were all guys. And I feel like that was just the environment I grew up in. And it was kind of, if you were going to play with us, you kind of, you know what I mean? Like it was very physical. So I just kind of grew up around this environment where I played football with the boys, and I wanted to be as good, if not better than them. And then once I realised I had like a natural talent for it, it was just a case of coming out my shell a bit more. I was quite a shy kid, so I didn't really want to join a team. I kind of just played when I got home from school. But yeah, it just went from there, where I went to school one day and they said, oh, you should really join the team. And I said, no, I don't want to. And a year later, I finally went to a training game, and we had a tournament about a month later. And from there, I got scouted for Man United Academy out of nowhere, and was like, oh, maybe this could be a thing. Maybe I actually have something I could turn into something. And yeah, it just went from there, really, yeah.
Yeah. I started playing when I was 9. I grew up somewhere quite rural, and there was just a team set up in the next village. So my dad kind of said, you and your mate are signed up and you're going along. So we did. And in our second ever match, we lost 21-0. And for 6 seasons, we won 2 matches. So being in goal, I have kind of no ego now. But it kind of set up, I think, a mentality towards football where I've never kind of been in it to win it, but it's just been about the playing, it's been about community, it's been about being part of sort of team solidarity. So sort of stayed with them. Stopped during uni because I felt that kind of experience was lost a bit. It became quite sort of cliquey and gendered, and then later picked up playing with AFC Unity, who was kind of my first sort of experience or exposure to grassroots teams are also politically engaged, and kind of, their tagline was like, there is an alternative, and kind of just learning about there being environments which weren't kind of how I'd experienced them before, basically. And from there, I've kind of just tried to be involved in as much as I can.
Brilliant. Cool. I'm going to ask you another question, Frank.
Okay.
Because you've been a goalie at the team that was playing on Transgender Day of Visibility, which was consisting of all transmasculine people.
Mm-hmm.
What was that experience like?
Lovely. So it was the truck game in March, which was the first. We thought it was the first in Europe. I think it's since come out that it's the first in the world that's all trans male 11s match against, I think it's predominantly a cis male team. I was so nervous as well. I think, as were most people, I sort of went into it thinking that everyone else knew each other, and then I'd be sort of the one outsider. But actually what turned out was that there are a lot of people from all around the country. People have flown down from Glasgow, people have come from all over to play this match. So that was kind of really eye-opening to see everyone with that same love and kind of passion for it coming from all over the UK. It was incredible. And I think that was the first time I played football since transitioning, which I was just a player. It wasn't about me being the only kind of trans person on the team, or it wasn't about my position in this bigger kind of infrastructure. It was just a bunch of guys on the team. But also what was very nice was before the match we got went for a communal wee, which was very nice, which I've missed since going to ladies' toilets. You don't do it in the men's, so it's nice to have sort of a gang of footballers just kind of scuttle off and go for a wee together. So that was a highlight, definitely.
Great. I heard that you scored, that you saved a really good shot as well. Lots of people have been telling me about it because several of the people that I've interviewed were also at the game, and they were like, "Yeah, Frank, he saved that one really good goal."
Thank you.
Just so you know, everyone's saying really nice things about you.
Thank you. That's
Brilliant.
nice to hear.
Have like a highlights reel we can put on.
It is on Instagram. It's the one save I think I've ever made that's been recorded. So film more grassroots matches as well, people, so we look better.
It was recorded. The
the whole
save.
match was.
Oh, okay, yeah, cool.
And the save, yeah.
Oh, brilliant, cool. And it's on Instagram. So I'm guessing it's on Track's Instagram?
Yes.
Cool, brilliant. Track's Instagram, everybody. Cool. And you have, to anybody who doesn't know, including anybody who'll be watching this online, Frank was the first person that I interviewed back in October of 2022. And since then, quite a few things have changed. The truck match being one of them, but then also you've recently set up this trans and non-binary team. So I guess what is that process like? Because we're still kind of in the early stages, but what is that process like right now?
I'd like to note that it's a collaborative kind of setup. So it's predominantly being led by somebody else at the moment. They're doing a lot of the legwork, but I'm there. I think the truck match was an eye-opener. I think that was kind of energy I needed, because I've spent a lot of the last couple of years being really quite frustrated and upset about kind of the lack of inclusion for trans men in grassroots spaces, because a lot predominantly kind of frame themselves as like women's and non-binary spaces, even though there's kind of often a hair's width between a transmasc experience and the people who are allowed to be there. So I've kind of been stewing on that for quite a long time, but through a team that I've kind of engaged with on that level, a group of people have kind of come out since who are all trans and non-binary sort of members of that team. And so we're starting to look into setting up our own space independently. It's frustrating having to self-organise, I think. What the fight I've been trying to have for the last couple of years has been for another team or other teams to kind of be able to just facilitate me without having to do that work. It's kind of coming to a point where I'm actually sort of energised and excited to do that. For now it's very early stages. We're just kind of intentionally not going too quickly. You know, it's very easy to get caught up in, you know, what logo we're going to have, what's a colour scheme, you know, get a sexy kit and this, that and the other. We're just trying to have a few kickabouts over the summer, kind of gauge like what the interest is, what the kind of demographic and like level of play is, and what the need is in terms of like level of competition as well. And then we'll see from there really. But we were surprised, as with the truck match and as with this, we're surprised at how many people have actually come and said that they are trans and non-binary and want to play football as well. I think it was really affirming, because I think I spent a lot of time being quite lonely. So good.
I'm finally going to be able to go to my first training session tomorrow, because I think you told me about this several months ago, and I was like, I'm not able to play football. I'm too busy going around talking to people about football. So I'm very excited to actually get to play a bit finally. Cool. Speaking of sort of, I guess the spaces that that exist and sort of where one may have to play. You obviously play on a women's team and you've been playing on women's teams your whole life. So can you tell us a little bit about what it is that's really important about women's football for you?
I think, in my experience, women's football's always been an inclusive space. Definitely, I mean, compared to like professional men's sports. It's always been somewhere where there's a lot of gay players, a lot of lesbian players, and I think it was only a matter of time before gates started opening with trans inclusion as well. I just think it's a community of people who understand each other, and that's always been my impression. Even when I came out, I was slightly nervous to tell my teammates just in case, because it still seemed quite new, even though I'd known since I was about 7, 8 years old that I wasn't a girl, wasn't a boy, and was like, there's no words for it. I don't really know which box I'm going to fit into. And that's obviously when I'd come out as gay and started playing football alongside that. And it's been a really strange journey to kind of see how I've always been the same person, but throughout that kind of transition, I've realised that football played a massive part in me being able to be who I was within the sport. And I owe a lot of that to the women's game and to the coaches that I've worked with and to the people that have supported me and to the friendships I've made. But yeah, I'd just say the sense of community is the biggest thing that I take from women's football.
Cool, brilliant. I guess you have kind of answered the first part of this already, but can you talk a little bit about what you get from the space and also how you manage sort of the importance of being in that space with also being trans in that space?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one to kind of balance, because I think I spoke about this when we had the original interview, that at one point it got to the point where I just didn't want to play because people were kind of not questioning but wondering why I'd be in such a space if I didn't identify with it and if it gave me dysphoria. And the simple answer was that I'd played almost professional sport for my whole life, and you mentioned like the fight to try and get those spaces at that level is going to take time. So the only option that I had was to kind of try and fit into the mould, which was women's football has been me, and if anything, like that is my community. So as much as I identify as being non-binary and I know I'm not a woman, these people are essentially like my family. So I think it's one of them where at the same time we need people to create those spaces, but it's also important to have the representation in women's football to say there are people that exist and we need to start creating other spaces for them rather than telling them you can't really fit in here, but you've just got to kind of change yourself. So yeah, that's been a big one for me, is kind of just not being a face or anything, but I know obviously Quinn's playing in the World Cup, which is insane to see like that representation on the biggest platform, and that's what kids need to see. Like if I'd have seen that at the age of 7 or 8, that there were players who looked like me, acted like me, identified with what I was, then I maybe could have kind of put an identity to myself quicker rather than going through years of confusion and not understanding why, oh, well, I've come out as gay when I was 11, why do I still not feel like I fit in this team? And the answer was all along that it wasn't to do with my sexuality, it was to do with my gender. So yeah, I think the representation is the first and foremost thing. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Nice, okay.
And Ingrid, you are coming from a slightly different perspective. You've built, or you're building this project called No Home Advantage. For anybody who doesn't know about it yet, can you actually just tell us what it is and how it got started?
Yeah, so one of the other members of Babe World, Ash, is a Spurs fan and I'm an Arsenal fan. We're also both very like lazy, passive football fans who aren't going to like smash anything up if we lose. We'll just kind of shrug it off. And I think one thing we realised quite early on in our friendship is actually there's no real space for us to watch football together. We can't go to the stadium, can't afford to. If we did, we couldn't sit together. The pub's totally like inaccessible for various reasons and a place of microaggression. And then at home, we can't afford or don't have money to pay for like Sky TV, BT Sports, the whole package to watch it. And I think we kind of knew we wanted to do a project that kind of crossed over arts practices and football, partly because there's been so much research in the arts, however useful or not, that looks at what it means to be an audience member, different types of audience engagement, and how we can get kind of more meaningful access for different audience members. So I think we wanted to kind of use that perspective to look at other people who've also had intersectional barriers to watching football and what that space could look like. And I think that comes with the caveat that outside of the stadium, there's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all space. So we never set out to create the perfect space that was accessible for every different person with every different barrier. Instead, what we wanted to do is experiment with creating like very comfortable spaces without kind of partisan rivalry or without alcohol and kind of the obvious like brewing sense of some kind of prejudice or offensive chant. Just one where really comfy, and also thinking about access needs that aren't necessarily covered when you watch a match on TV or in the stadium, and how we could incorporate that. So that, and then that was part of a wider bit of research we did, which kind of led us to No Home Advantage, which was an event tailored for Leeds 2023, looking at creating a safe space for marginalised people to watch football in Leeds. And then the other thing we kind of wanted to look at is like what it means to be a passive spectator, because quite often if you're not the traditional fan, you're only really looked at or thought about if you show some kind of exceptionalism, whether that's in terms of commitment or in terms of kind of destructiveness. So if you're like an Asian football hooligan, that's one of the things that's been really heavily studied in terms of football fandom, but never kind of positive ways to get engagement from that group of people. So yeah, we wanted to kind of look at a place for very passive spectators who felt barriers to typical football spaces to engage. But the other thing that was really important for us is like barriers to watching football doesn't start and end in the stadium or the pub. It's a much bigger thing. So one thing we've really been doing, partly just because it's really fun, is like looking at fanzines and like 90s football merch and like knockoff football shirts and kind of trying to recreate that. So for our events, we have a lot of merch that people can take home, because if you have barriers to football spaces, you're not getting programs or you're not getting things to take home to remind you that you were there, like the scarves or the hats. So we kind of wanted to allow people to connect with football in a similar way, but without the barriers that a stadium might present. And also it's just really fun to make like pins and badges and give them out. And yeah, I think other things we wanted to look at are kind of like what happens when a group of fans kind of get to come together and talk about football in a really comfortable space after kind of not being in those communities because they've not been comfortable or not felt invited. So we've been doing things like in our test events where we've done research, inviting people to kind of bring their own favourite football clips and take ownership of it, which people have like fed back on really well. And then, yeah, I think just like things like, again, like playing video games. So the event in Leeds, we're going to set up Mario Strikers and maybe Football Manager. We're going to be playing some songs from a local band who talk about football and kind of being barred from football spaces. And like just think about football as a really holistic experience, and kind of what other experiences you get barriers from if you can't just engage in a typical way has been really important for us. And we've tried to incorporate all of that, as well as just creating like a room with some bean bags and the football on the telly.
And you've got an event that's coming on the 12th of August.
Yeah.
Can you talk just a little bit more about what's going to happen in that? Just
Yeah.
so that if anybody is interested in coming.
Yeah, for sure. So it's going to be in Trinity Shopping Centre, which is just down the road. And it's going to be in the afternoon, and it's going to be a mixture of watching footy clips, so some more serious, some kind of more like classic fails. We're going to do a compilation of those. We're going to try and be quite localised with that as well, so kind of look at some of Leeds United's like best and worst moments. And then we're going to have the debut of a song by a band called Lucky Iris, who make music about football in Leeds. And then we're working with a really great local artist called Laura Lulika, and they're making a mascot for the event, which is going to kind of look at, so Laura does really great work about like disability and disabled bodies, and they want to use the mascot to look at how actually sometimes a sports mascot is the most relatable thing on the pitch if you don't have a typical like healthy body or what's seen as a healthy body. And then, yeah, I think we're just going to have like a couple of artist talks about our research, because we've kind of been doing interviews, gathering data just to show that this is a real issue, not something we've just made up. And then, yeah, again, like a really informal space, chance to chat. You can come and go. We're not expecting people to kind of like sit down and listen to us talk for 10 hours and watch clips for 10 hours. We just want to create kind of like a really nice, relaxed space. And obviously that's hard to do because you can't administrate that, like the vibes come or they don't, but that's what we're working towards.
Cool, lovely. Thank you very much. Kaz, I wanted to just ask you a little bit about, you've obviously talked about where you are right now and sort of how you're managing sort of the playing in a space that you really care about, but also sort of there is that friction between who you are as a footballer and who you are as a trans person. So in the future, potentially post playing football at a professional level, what do you think sort of a potential future could look like in which you're able to, I guess, combine those things more organically for you?
Yeah, well, firstly, I think when I look back at, say, from the age of 8 when I started having thoughts that I wasn't a girl, to 16, 17 when I started thinking I don't want to play at this level, like I just want to quit, I don't feel like I belong. I feel like I owe that girl that I thought I was or didn't know who I was, I owe that person kind of the respect to say, no, you deserve to make it in football, you deserve to play at the highest level and at the levels that you feel like you deserve to and were capable to play at. So that's the first thing, is I want to play as long as possible for her, which it's kind of like a contradiction because in my eyes, she still very much exists as a person that I was and a person that everyone thought I was. And yeah, it's important that I kind of pay homage to that and respect that person as well. Afterwards, I'm hoping I don't give up anytime soon, but I think it's more a case of doing the things that I wanted to do as me now that I don't feel able to do just yet. Because like I say, I'm still finishing off my footballing journey. And I think it's important for me to, once that's over, to maybe go into coaching. It might be similar things to what you're doing, but I want to make a space or create opportunities for people like me who don't know which box they fit into. And I think everything about sport, it's very categorised through sex. It's very female, male, even if it's not men and women. It's very much what we're born as. That's where you belong. And it's about time we realise that it's not like everything in life, it's a spectrum. Gender's a spectrum, sexuality is a spectrum. And we need to start creating opportunities for people who don't know but can figure it out just through trying, through exploring different options. But you need to be able to have those in the first place. So afterwards, I'm hoping that I can maybe go down a coaching role and just, again, be some sort of representation where it might be not just exclusive to non-binary players, it might be trans players, it might be people who just want to exist as queer and as open as they want to be. I want to be someone who they can come to, ask for advice, and whatever that might be. So I'm not sure what the future holds after football, but I just know I want to pay respect to the person that I was and also the person that I want to be after football's over.
And then hopefully those kids get to play some really, really good football as well.
Oh, yeah. I'll be harsh on them though.
No, absolutely, that's what you're supposed to be. Good. And yeah, so Frank, you're obviously building this space, which is an alternative football space. I think in terms of, at least around this area, there hasn't been a trans and non-binary specific team before. Great. I just wanted to ask you, like, how do you think that this team feels different for you from some of the teams that you've played on previously?
I mean, the biggest difference is that it prioritises trans and non-binary people. I mean, we currently say like no allies at sessions. It is purely for trans and non-binary people to find themselves, which I think in itself is just so refreshing, because often it's kind of a tag on, or, you know, you're the only trans person, or, you know, it's women and trans and non-binary people. It's kind of, you know, it's the first time that we feel kind of really prioritised in a space where we're looking at what our own needs are. And also you can make like funny jokes about being trans, and, you know, like there's all this banter around it, and it's just, yeah, it's celebrating being trans and playing football.
It's very exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm just really excited to get to play on that team. Or,
No, do.
Yeah. I guess, how are you hoping that, I guess, maybe more teams like this sort of popping up in other places, how that could affect the conversation about how to build inclusive spaces in grassroots football? Do you want me to
Sorry, say that
rephrase
again,
it?
yeah.
Good, that's all good. How do you think that building more spaces like this could make grassroots football more inclusive overall? And what do you think maybe is needed to make grassroots football more inclusive?
Okay, I think one of the biggest barriers towards setting up spaces like this is who do you play against? Like, you can go and you can have a kickabout, but ultimately there's kind of, not a shelf life, but it's like you go and you have a kickabout once a week, and that is kind of the end game. What you need is people to play against. You need more local teams, you need a league, you need an infrastructure, and you need people who are kind of able to facilitate all of that. So the more that are popping up, the better. I mean, Manchester are doing a fantastic job at the moment with their kind of upcoming like 11s league. There's sort of more and more kind of like grassroots five-a-side teams popping up in Leeds who are kind of like trans and queer inclusive. So these things are coming, but I think what's needed is allyship outside of the trans community to be able to set this up, because you need obviously people to play against, and realistically there's not enough trans and binary people to make up a full-time Sunday 11s league in Leeds. That doesn't exist. But what could happen is that more cisgender people who have the privilege of playing in FA regulated 11s leagues actually step out of those and make up the numbers to create something else. But what that takes is people to give up the privilege of playing in something that already exists and take a risk and support the trans people who don't have that space and don't have that access. 'Cause it's very easy to say like, yeah, we support you. But then if you won't turn up on a Sunday and you only have 6 people and you're trying to play 11s, it just dissolves very quickly. People get frustrated. What you need is kind of, more support on every level of the infrastructure without taking up space, without, dominating it, but kind of it becoming an even kind of mix of trans people, non-binary people and allies. Yeah, but we need people to support us as well.
Yeah. I guess that's also what the AFL is about, is creating that sort of, we're not doing the FA leagues, we're doing the alternative football leagues.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, but it does take people kind of stepping out of traditional FA leagues and deprioritising those to kind of build these.
Yeah, cool. And speaking of, I guess, allyship, in terms of fan spaces, how do you think cis people in football fan spaces can be supportive of trans people in those spaces and help create those make those spaces more inclusive for trans people specifically?
Yeah, I think quite often there's a strong urge, which I don't necessarily think is that good allyship, to kind of expect a trans person to also take on a role of the educator and do that emotional labour. And I feel like setting up whatever space it is so that there's a clear expectation that people don't put that pressure and that emotional labour on the person they want to learn about, because actually that's not conducive to them having a good time, is a really helpful thing. I'm not sure how much this works, but I am very interested in kind of how hard the arts sector has gone on things like Safer, Braver Spaces policy and kind of underlying their intent to get rid of different forms of prejudice with various policies. Like, I do think football spaces are also doing that. And I think, sometimes those informal fan spaces could benefit from kind of Safer, Braver Spaces policies, fan policies, player policies, and just really making sure that they're enforced. And I think also, like, outside of your fan space, there is like a responsibility if you see yourself as an ally. And I don't think allyship is something you can say you are. I think it's something you kind of have to earn. And I think part of that is being responsible for, if you go and see a match at your club and you see kind of transphobic stickers in the bathroom, like alerting the club, following up and holding them accountable for their response. So just kind of taking action where you can and going above and beyond to kind of make a better space in sports generally, not just in kind of a hall you've rented for a weekend. And then I think kind of in terms of like allyship, I think there's probably a lot about kind of coaching and referee levels getting a lot more training and support to make sure that they know how to practice allyship, making sure that there's more opportunities for people to coach and referee or kind of manage as well, who are either allies or who are trans. I think just kind of taking the L and doing as much work as you can to make sure that if you are booking a space to watch sports or play sports, that you've done a research, you know it's a safe space or has potential to be a safe space, you're willing to hold the people you invite into the space accountable, so it's not all falling on the people there who are trans to kind of sort situations out or explain things. So yeah.
Thank you very much. And then in terms of, I guess, mutual support really is what I was thinking about as well, was Kaz, that you've actually played against trans women before. And you told me about the story, but I was kind of thinking that you could talk a little bit about it and what it meant for you.
Sure. I think this was an important moment probably in my journey as well, to realise that it falls on our eyes, but ultimately every single individual, regardless of sexual, regardless of anything, we all have an individual responsibility to hold ourselves accountable and take each moment we can as like an education for others if we can and if the moment presents itself. So I'm obviously not going to name like names or teams, but we played against a team and the goalkeeper was a trans woman, and I'd heard comments before, and for me, I was already kind of in my shell. I hadn't come out to this team yet. I didn't know how to kind of approach it, but I felt like it's easier to stick up for others. So when I heard a comment, it was kind of like, if that was against me, I'd want someone else who knew my experience to stick up for me. So I took that as an education. It wasn't anything really bad. It was just a slight judgment on a trans woman playing in a women's league. And I heard a few comments, and I brought it up to the team after in the changing room, and I said, look, like, I haven't told you this, but I am trans and identify as trans myself. I said, and I need to take this moment to kind of educate you all on why, yeah, it might seem light-hearted to you, or it might seem just a throwaway comment, but it starts from that level. That impacts at the top when we say, a man might make a slur or anything. That actually starts from the small building blocks at the bottom where people don't call something out, or it doesn't happen overnight. Like transphobia, racism, any of that, it doesn't happen overnight. It starts from people not calling it out at the bottom and at the core. So I didn't know how the team was going to respond. I didn't know how the staff was going to respond. And straight away, the manager took me outside and she said, look, I'll take you in with your permission, obviously, and we'll sit down and talk about it. And she couldn't thank her enough. She was brilliant. She sat down with everyone, she explained it. And afterwards, I had people coming up to me and asking me questions. And that was the first time that it wasn't just about me. It wasn't just selfishly me thinking, I'm non-binary, how's it going to feel? It was someone else in that space and knowing that actually this is a bigger picture. And it was nice. I think I've had a good experience in football where I haven't faced much transphobia, I haven't faced much discrimination. And it was good to know that there is that level of support. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of initiation to say, look, this isn't okay, this is why. And a lot of the time people will try and understand. And that's all I've ever asked personally, is that people try and educate themselves, want to learn. But I've probably had an idea in my head that people wouldn't want to. And the minute that I actually called it out and said, no, this isn't okay, straight my manager was like, okay, how can we fix the situation? And it was nice. And obviously the goalkeeper never found out. It wasn't anything that needed to be brought up, but it was just a wake-up moment for me where I thought, actually, I need to take responsibility as well, because as much as we might have different experiences, her being a trans woman, me being non-binary, ultimately we're sharing a queer space. And it's important that we stick up for each other and hold other people accountable as well.
Yeah, and it's also, it's nice to think that, if we're all doing this, then people are sticking up for us when we don't know it. It's nice to have that thought in the back of our heads. Yeah, cool. Ingrid, I just wanted to ask you, because Kaz, you also mentioned transphobia and racism, but when building these spaces, we also intersectionality. You can't not be transphobic if you're not also considering the intersectional elements of anybody's identity. So what is it that you think is important to keep in mind when building intersectional, accessible, inclusive spaces?
Yeah, I think so that was something that felt quite personal to us as Babe World when we set out, because I think we both feel, or all of the members of Babe World, there are 4 of us, feel like we do face different intersectional barriers to engaging with football across race, class, gender, disability. And so it was really important to us because there have been provisions where oh, there's a chill out room in, I think, like Watford Stadium for people who are autistic, which is great, but that's not going to stop the fact that like we're going to be abused in the stands for maybe being there in a lesbian couple or not looking like traditional fans would expect us to look. So I think, yeah, we were aware that the way that barriers impact us was very intersectional. And I kind of think when we thought about that, we were like, oh yeah, everyone's probably talking about that. But then when we looked, there was really no one talking about intersectional fandom. And it was very much like, we'll look at different issues that might arise from specific identity markers in isolation, which obviously goes very, very slowly towards solving problems. But actually, I think what needs to happen is a much bigger, much more holistic look at football culture as a whole, from kind of the top levels right down to the grassroots levels, thinking about where these barriers came from, how football came to be, and what bits need to be kind of rewritten or like addressed as a whole. And I think some of the models that interest me are like fan ownership, so kind of FC United, the German model, which wouldn't necessarily create a fairer playing field, but it does go away to kind of allowing people to get their opinions across. Yeah, so I think models like that and things that will give a range of fans who do face kind of intersectional barriers a chance to contribute would be really helpful in kind of tackling things not as isolated problems. And yeah, I think another barrier is like, we just don't have the research to back stuff up because people are so specific in researching fan experiences. So often around a particular barrier that there's nothing looking at like the bigger picture of what stops people engaging in football. So I think actually, and this is why I think what you are doing with your interviews is going to be so useful, because we just need to capture that knowledge before we start to change it. Because like, it's fine for me to sit here having done like 2 Instagram polls to say this is a problem, but I think we really do need to take a wide survey of fans and do much more interviews to kind of find out why people are facing these barriers. And that needs to go a lot further afield than just people who are kind of season ticket holders. Like, we need to be able to reach people who aren't necessarily engaged with their club in a way that includes them financially investing in that club through a ticket or a season ticket. We need to do like much broader surveying. We need to like look at that research, and then we kind of need to start tackling from across the whole infrastructure.
Thank you very much. Frank, I have a slightly lighter question for you than where we've been for a second, which is just really sort of, I guess, what is it that you're enjoying about the team right now? Where it is before, you know, with the hope that it's going to grow, and that also what you were talking about, that there are leagues and that there are people to play against. But where we're at the beginning, and having actually gone from a place where last year you were looking and you were trying to figure out what to do, to now where you and some other people who are also working on this are actually making it happen. What is it that is enjoyable about that?
Just being around more trans people playing, I think, for a start, being around people who are excited for it, being around people who want to make it happen as well, and not kind of just carrying that load, not that it was ever just going to be me, but like not feeling like I'm the only person who kind of wants to deliver this as well. Yeah, just feeling really excited to be around people who have that energy as well. What was the end of the question again?
It was really just because it was more of a longer explanation around the question more than anything else. But it was more just a sense of sort of, we're here, and even though this is quite a difficult sort of place in which we're still sort of searching for a lot of things, we're still trying to build a lot of spaces, we're still trying to look for that support, but things are happening, and they're happening in a way that maybe even last year they weren't, and that is in and of itself, perhaps, I mean, I was hoping, an enjoyable experience. So
yeah, definitely. And I'm excited as well because I think this team can also be a vehicle for challenging others. Quite a lot of people in this group are kind of, we're building up questions that we can put to other teams. For example, if we get invited to, or kind of if other teams get invited to tournaments that are framed as like women's and non-binary tournaments, it's about posing questions to those organisers and actually saying, are trans men invited to this? Because, you know, obviously that's not specified in women and non-binary, but are they allowed? Are they not? Where do you kind of sit on that? And then next level is, are you willing to change your terminology to become more inclusive of that? So is it that actually women, transgender and non-binary people are allowed? It's just kind of, yeah, we're able to kind of use this group to kind of start thinking about how we want to put kind of a good practice to other teams as well. Yeah, which is exciting. And also what's been nice as well is talking about what level of competition we want to play at. There are a lot of people in this group who have played at kind of quite a middling kind of level, or have been playing for quite a number of years. And there are some people who've never played before, some people who are very beginner. And what's exciting as well about it is being able to look at how we might be able to facilitate all those different kind of levels of play, and seeing a drive for more competitive play as well. Because I think often it's quite common for, or in my experience, what I've seen is that the kind of trans-inclusive spaces are also combined with the beginner spaces, which is great because there are so many barriers towards trans people even becoming beginners because, you know, they can't access sports. But there's also a lot of people in your experience as well who are more experienced as football players, and it's not, I wouldn't quite say patronising, but I just find it very frustrating not being able to access a more competitive level of play, not being able to develop as a player, not being able to be challenged on like an 11s kind of scale, and having like kind of your individual development to think about, when kind of what you get most often is kind of like a very casual and very friendly and very important space kind of kickabout, but what's the next step? And that's what we're kind of talking about. So that's what I'm really excited about at the moment, is kind of seeing what we might be able to do to kind of facilitate a more competitive level of play as well.
That's so exciting. Yeah. That's really cool. You also mentioned at some point to me that you are hoping to find a name at some point. Mm-hmm. That's still something that's being thought about. Are you open to suggestions?
I'm sure we'll take anything. At the moment, it's just trans and non-binary Leeds. Cool. So anything that's a bit more jazzy.
If anybody has any suggestions for a jazzy football team name that's not trans and non-binary football Leeds, Frank is here.
And also anyone who wants to get involved in any level, playing
yes.
or, you know, supporting to manage, as long as you are trans or non-binary.
Yeah.
Allies. For now, step out. But,
yeah.
you know, later on, we'll invite people back in. But yeah, we want something a bit sexier, I think, whatever that is.
Whatever that is. I also do want to mention that to anybody here that doesn't know, which I don't think is a lot of you, but to anyone here who doesn't know, there is, in fact, a kickabout training session tomorrow at Hyde Park at 11.
Yep.
Brilliant. I just want to be sure that I got that right.
Yeah, we're meeting at the Queen Victoria statue on the corner of Hyde Park for anybody who's interested in coming.
For anyone who's interested in coming, which is me, by the way. I'm interested in coming, but hopefully... I feel like, okay, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I feel like it's actually very enjoyable playing football in the rain. I love getting muddy. Yep. I love falling over and then slipping, or like getting knocked over and then being like, I am muddy. I am my most childish primal self right now. And it's raining and it's great and we're running around so we're not cold. I love it personally. I don't know what you two feel about that.
It's an excuse if you make a mistake then
yeah.
as well.
That's the reason I used to start playing. I just want to run around in the mud. I don't really like football.
Cool. Cool. I'm not entirely sure what the time is actually because I completely forgot to wear a watch today, but
Mine's broken. Sorry. It just says it's 11 o'clock.
It's not 11 o'clock right now. No, it's okay. Sorry, this wasn't. It's 4? Okay, brilliant. That's perfect. Because I just wanted to, as a sort of final question to you, Ingrid, just wanted to ask you what the next steps for your project is as well, because I think there's something that's happening after the event on the 12th.
Yeah, so I mean, we've not got anything straight after in Leeds on the 12th, but we would like to continue our work, particularly in Leeds. So hopefully get some more funding, do some more kind of Saturdays or weekends where people can come and watch football. And I think 'cause we had certain limitations with this project, we couldn't necessarily get the space we wanted, which was here, Clay. So like kind of getting it into a space like this, kind of getting the word out more, building more of a community. And then, yeah, I think we also want to do more opportunities for people to creatively engage as well with what we do. So we did a project for Norwich and Norfolk Festival last year where we worked with the queer community there who kind of crossed over sports and football and made a zine where they all kind of talked about their experiences. And then people came along who didn't want to create art but kind of contributed to a workshop we did, and then our graphic designer kind of turned that into pages of the zine. So I think we'd like to do things like that because, especially somewhere like Norwich, which when I went seemed very small, it might not be, but yeah, like there was a real sense that we've not had anything like this before. So I think we want to keep doing that and give people chances to be creative in a way they talk about football, but also like recognise the creativity that is inherent to playing football and football fandom and just finding a way to stream a match. So yeah, I think we want to do more events like that that kind of cross over being creative and watching football, create more safe spaces for it. And then like just to go back to the research, we want to just keep gathering data, keep getting primary research and hopefully get some funding from someone to do something, whatever that might be, that kind of supports what our research has found.
Yes, please fund us. Please fund our research projects and also our football spaces. That's good allyship, I think. Cool. As a last question to all three of you, I guess we can start with Ingrid again and then move down this way. And that's okay, you're allowed to cough. I promise I won't judge you for it. And with the acknowledgement that all three of you have kind of touched on this already, but do you have any final words in sort of your respective fields on what the ideal could look like? If we're talking genuinely ideal and I guess utopia. I think I actually said utopia when I was in my conversations as well, but I'm liking the word. So yeah, starting with you.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I think like I don't necessarily think Baile would need to be the people to create this everywhere all the time, but like just somewhere to watch football that isn't like an angry pub would be lovely. So yeah, I think that for me feels like one of the most important stages of making a better kind of utopia for fans. And then I think more meaningful opportunities to engage with football from a young age, because I feel like you kind of get an opportunity to play it in school and then suddenly it stops and then there's nothing unless you're gonna like play it at university or you're gonna like look for like a specific kind of amateur league to play with. But for me, where I'm from in Stoke, there's like nowhere I could play football if I wanted to. Like there's no amateur league I could join. There's a disability league, but that's only open to men and has made it quite explicit that that's not going to change. So I think, yeah, more opportunities to engage is going to be vital. I think, and the other thing is just to kind of change what's thought about as like an actual football fan, because if you don't look like what people think actual football fan is going to look like, you have like the interrogation before you've proved yourself of like, how many footballers can you name? Do you remember who scored this goal in 2004 in this match? And that's quite tiring to have to do like an impromptu test every time. And I think part of that is kind of moving this focus away from just football in the stadium being the be all and end all of what football is for a lot of people, and kind of thinking of football as this bigger thing, and thinking of the different ways you can engage is really valuable. And I think when like spending all night scrolling on football gossip is seen as good and as valuable football fandom as going to the stadium, I think that's when it'll be a utopia for me.
I think for me there's a much larger conversation to be had when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community in general. And I think the crossover with sport and like wider society is that people got used to kind of giving people crumbs and them saying, that's enough for you, be pleased with that. So, oh, we let you join in school. Yeah, you play grassroots, that's great, but actually it doesn't start there. We can't have 3 or 4 exceptions. If anything, the exception that there might be a trans player playing at the World Cup, that doesn't prove anything. If anything, that proves the rule that there's not enough people in those spaces. So I think there's a much larger question of how can we start it from kids rather than, oh, well, be happy with what you've got, because trans people don't have to be happy with the bare minimum. Like, that's always been an issue. Equality is just that everyone's treated the same and has the same equal opportunity. So I think for me, it's just a case of people realising this isn't an overnight process. And as frustrating as it is, the issue in society is we have to be patient, because not everybody's going to understand. And as wrong as it is that people are going to have these prejudices and these like discriminatory views about us, we have to understand that we will get there eventually. In that time, we have to get them baby steps, and eventually them baby steps will lead to the utopia of people having equality in sport. And I think at the end of the day, we need to realise society, football, sport, we're all people. Like, sport is not that deep. We all should be, it's not that deep. We should all have access to sport because it's fun. Nobody starts playing sport as a 6-year-old going, I want to be world champion one day. Like, unless you've got a really strict parent. But like, most kids just play because they enjoy it. And that's what we need to get back to, is remembering we're all just kids who got bigger, people who got taller, and now we're here and we've made something into a much more serious issue. Like, let people play.
Yeah.
And that's as simple as it needs to be.
Yeah. Also, very quickly, I just wanted to check. Quinn is playing for Canada, right? Canada. Yeah. So I think we should all stand Canada, just the Canadian team, just for Quinn. Just saying. Cool. Frank?
Could you repeat the question again?
Yes, I can repeat the question. It's been a long time coming down this way. Yeah. Basically, what, in your case, in sort of a grassroots space, what you think a ideal future would look like if you could just choose.
Okay, I mean, for me personally, something like Truck, again, was absolutely fantastic. Going out with like 10 other trans men in the rain and just playing and just having that level of play, that access to it, and just having like a fun, silly time as well, and it was competitive, is the dream. But I think just ultimately trans people being able to access football on whatever level they want to be playing at, I think instead of kind of, you know, gatekeeping more competitive levels or gatekeeping infrastructures to league and access to like resources and funding, is for all of that to be a complete level playing field for trans people. And just having fun as well. I think it's such a struggle sometimes, and I think it'd be nice in an ideal world for it to just be to go out and play, not to go out and play as a trans person, although that is very important to a lot of people, but just to be able to go and play football.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, you can join as an absolute beginner at 40, or you can have played from when you were 4 years old, and you can get into a professional team that is respectful of the way that you fit into a space. And yeah, that would be neat. Cool. I'm going to open it up to the audience. If the audience has any questions, please, I'm sure I don't have to say this to you lovely people, but please be respectful of the panelists. Just saying it as disclaimer. I'm sure it doesn't. Yeah, it's like.
Yeah, goalkeeping. You can say
goalkeeping sucks. No. Yeah. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them. It's not a requirement, though. It's okay. I won't put you on the spot. But if anybody has anything burning. Going once.
I guess as we're talking about scrolling and watching like Women's World Cup and sort of like very digestible digital format, Ingrid, you spoke about learning engaging with football very early on with FIFA as a digital space. I was just wondering if like what you would say does, and when we were talking about football utopias, I was wondering like, is it worth a sort of digital space, a digital forum, like tugs towards or engaging specifically with the trans community, like how important that could be and what that could look like? Because again, Kaz, what you said about the exception, like spaces that look at football culture, like Copper 90, for example, which sort of does look at radical-ish imaginations of football culture. But again, the exception is they've got like 2 videos on trans inclusion in sport, and I was just wondering like how important that would be, and how the three of you feel about the digital consumption of football, and whether you think there's a space there for it to be, because the internet seems like a very trans place sometimes.
Yeah, I remember playing.
Sorry, very quickly. Did everybody hear the question? Are we good? Okay, sorry, continue.
It's when you mentioned about FIFA, I remember I think it was a few years ago when they introduced women's players into FIFA, and as this 25-year-old at the time, I was like, oh my God. And like, I sprinted upstairs, I was like, I'm downloading it right now. I think it was like 80 quid for the special edition. I was like, I'm getting it. And I sat there and I played for hours, and like, I had a few friends and I was texting my friends being like, oh my God, you're on FIFA. I was like, oh my God, like I can see you on the screen. And it was so insane to see that representation. And it'd be amazing at some point to get that within the trans community. But even I did a little bit of coaching, and we had little girls coming into the sessions and they were saying, oh my God, like I'm playing FIFA and I'm playing as Steph Horton and da, da, da. And we take those comments and it was like, oh, that's cute, but like we underestimate like the importance of that. Like a little girl is seeing herself reflected and she's seeing that as, oh my God, I could be on FIFA one day. And even if she never made it to FIFA, even if she just joined a team and met a best friend, and that, like, you don't know where things can lead just through seeing yourself represented on a screen. And I think especially in like these days, a lot of the things that kids are going to see is on screen. So if we could get to a stage where a trans player can see that, that'd be unreal and amazing. Yeah. Don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I think like sometimes digital spaces are best formed organically. Like if you try and impose them on a community, it's often not a like very vibey or active space. And I think with all the changes, particularly you two have talked about, is how some of those groups are going to pop up in a grassroots kind of coincidental way, and they'll be much more thriving spaces than like if I went home and made a Facebook group for everyone and then kind of badgered you to put comments in. But I think one thing about digital spaces and football that's really exciting is kind of the ability to use like imagination and unlimited possibilities. So someone in Babe World has done a lot of research, not specifically on football, but generally on video games, about how actually when you're questioning your gender identity as a child, being able to play as someone who looks like how you want to look like or how you feel you should look like is actually a very liberating way to kind of realize that gender identity. So I think there are some interesting things you can do in video games or sports which might not be what that game set out to do, but can actually be very reaffirming. And then I think more broadly, like I might never be able to see Port Vale win the Premier League in real life, but yes, I've seen them win the Premier League on FIFA many a time, which is kind of just as good for me because I engineered that to happen. So I think whilst there are like limitations to real life football, whether that is kind of not being able to watch it, not being included in it, like obviously video games or the internet aren't accessible for everyone. Like there is a cost barrier, there is like a digital literacy barrier, but I think if you have it, there's a real potential there to kind of imagine the football future you want. And kind of, I know people on Football Manager who've kind of made like all British Asian teams because they felt that would represent them, or kind of made a team and told themselves like, this team are all trans, even if they're not, because actually they, in their head, that's the team they'd like to manage. So I think like imagination and possibility there is much more than in physical football, and if you can have fun with that, then do it. And if that's helpful for you or reaffirming, which I know is definitely something I've found, then 100% do it.
Cool. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Go for it.
Yeah, I guess I'm interested in all of the things that you're giving yourself. Ways to kind of facilitate and take some of the organisational labour off kind of trans communities whilst centering their experiences without asking for educational labour from kind of trans experiences. It's setting up a league that isn't in the FA is something that lots of us, like me and Frank, have kind of had discussions about this and will continue to for a while, and it's something that, yeah, we're trying to do, and I guess it's finding ways to help facilitate that as a cisgender person that's part of the queer community but doesn't share those experiences, and knowing how to do that without asking too much of the trans community.
Do you want to?
You go.
I think, yeah, there is a fear of asking too much, but I think also quite a lot of people, in my experience, are quite willing to share bits. I mean, ultimately, I've kind of come through this whole process of not wanting to share, and I found it hasn't really got me anywhere, other than I sit and I'm lonely and I'm like, well, I'm not playing football with anyone because I haven't got anyone to play football with, because I haven't, you know, there is kind of a bit of give and take. I think as long as you're kind of aware of that fact, which you already are, then I think that's a starting block. But there's kind of easy wins which people can already start to take, which aren't just around sort of trans people, but just access generally. Is like, for example, like gatekeeping opportunities, gatekeeping access to spaces which not just trans people, but other people might struggle to access, for example, like tournaments which sit outside of, you know, FA infrastructure. They're like a sort of ideal place for trans people to be able to engage with. But if you label them as, say, women and non-binary, that can be quite exclusive. Or if you're only inviting teams but not recognising that actually there might be people who can't get into a team to then get invited to a tournament. So it's kind of looking at about how you're making sort of your team and your matches and your tournaments more accessible generally, because there might be people who haven't been able to join a team because of lack of funds, because they live in a rural location. You know, it's kind of, you could say, oh, well, at this tournament we have one team which is dedicated for people, when we're centering people, trans people, for example, but for anybody who isn't part of a team but they want to come and play, or we can put, you know, it's about being vocal about being able to give access to people who can't even access a club. So there are things you can kind of think about before then thinking about trans people specifically as well.
Yeah. Just mentioning, I think you mentioned something about like emotional labour and how we take that off, like the trans community. Just from like a personal opinion, I don't know whether other people would share this view, but my platform's kind of TikTok and online and making videos, and some are silly and some are educational, but that's kind of my way of like expressing myself. And I went for a phase where I was getting a lot of hate comments, a lot of transphobic comments, racist comments, and I completely took myself back. I changed my content, I tried to mould myself, and taking away my own voice and saying, actually, I'm going to hide myself away for a bit. That felt worse than taking on the emotional labour of being like, no, like, someone has to open these doors and someone has to kind of push the boundaries and someone does have to take the crap, basically. And from my perspective, it felt worse and it felt more wrong taking myself out and saying, oh, I don't want to be the one to do the labour. But nobody's going to care about trans and queer issues like the community. So I think whether it's wrong or right, we have to be the first ones to kind of say, you have to listen to us. And hopefully from that, organisations will start to educate themselves in order to create these spaces and create teams and create leagues. But just because you mentioned about the emotional labour, and it was just an experience I had where I tried to take that off my shoulders, and a few of my friends did, and we said, we don't really want to make that type of content, we don't want to take on the burden. But that almost felt worse, because then it was kind of taking your own voice away, but knowing that you're also taking hundreds of other people who might not want to go online and talk about it, might not want to go and join a team, but your experience, we might be like one person, but we might impact one person. It's a string of events. So yeah, just about the labour thing, sometimes for me it feels worse to remove myself from that situation rather than say, I'm going to have to be the one to kind of put my foot through the door first, kind of thing.
And ultimately as well, I think, yes, it is definitely better to ask trans people to input, because my frustration, I've had a lot of frustration about kind of tokenism within football spaces, where you see a lot of people slap a trans flag on and they go, woo, we love trans people. But then you ask the question, where do trans men play? And you get met with this kind of blank look, and people are like, oh, I'd never considered that before. And it's like, well, you're forgetting about quite a lot of trans people there. So yeah, I'm coming around to the point where I'm much more receptive to having these conversations again, because I found that I'm just getting more and more frustrated if we don't.
Can I also just add, this is not really my experience. I'm talking about somebody else here. It's just one of the many interesting conversations that I've had with somebody called Lee, who is both out as a trans man and coaching a girls team, but he's also stealth on a men's team, which is quite interesting. And this is not me saying what's right or what's wrong or anything like that. It's one of the quite interesting experiences around sort of his experiences that he, from within a sort of like a spy, but in a way, he's in this quite lads team, and he's challenging them on sort of misogyny and sexism and some of the and homophobia and some of these kind of comments that cis men especially can throw around quite casually, but also he talks about as well how now they start going to more sober spaces, now they start talking about their mental health more to each other, now they are just in a slightly more healthy environment as cisgender men as well, which, you know, it's an interesting, I think there's an element of what it is one is able to do, and also it aligns a little bit with what you want, because he wanted to play on this team as well. This is not me saying that like trans men should just start going into cis men's teams and putting themselves in danger or anything like that, but it's very interesting to see the different kinds of levels of ability that I think some people, you put out that content on TikTok, you're building this team. Lee, who's over in one of the screens, is in a cis men's space, and it's just interesting that we're all coming at it from different angles, I think is what I wanted to say.
It's a funny misunderstanding as well of, we shouldn't have to, but when people get to know you aside from your gender identity, even if it's like you're at work or you're in any space, you're on a night out, if people don't know and they go, oh, I like you, you're cool, and then if you tell them, oh, by the way, I'm trans, or the way I'm not, they might have a reaction that's like, oh, and I've had that where instantly change like body language, like the way and it changes, but it's like before you knew that, you liked me as a person. And that's the interesting thing, is when people don't know, people might assume certain views of cisgendered men, but then if they get to like that person, it's almost like the spark to see, look, you like the person, the gender, the sexuality, it shouldn't matter. And yeah, it's a good place to start. We shouldn't have to, but sometimes you've got to do things you don't want for the greater good. And yeah, I get that experience.
It's a tough one.
And yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, and there are lots of different ways of getting into it, I think, and there are lots of different things that some people can do, and then other people can do other things. I don't think there's a one-size-fit-all type of labour that we do in order to make this world better for us. Yeah.
Can I ask a question of you two? Maybe more for you, Frank, I don't know. So I think you touched on this already. It's like, obviously you really want to promote your team. You want people who are looking for that to be able to come along, or just see that there's something out there and maybe they can replicate that in their community. But what you don't want to do is kind of have the algorithm take you onto the like toxic, like hateful bit of the internet where suddenly you're getting like hate comments and you're in a Daily Mail and stuff like that. And I think it must be the same for like, if you do want to shout about that your team is trans inclusive, or you have a trans player who is happy to shout out about that, there's a balance between promoting it so that people know that that is something that you support and do, versus not kind of putting people in vulnerable or dangerous situations online or in real life, because the internet is such a horrible place, and it feels like algorithms are growing more and more towards transphobia and hate. So yeah, how do you balance that needing to grow with not getting hate?
Currently, it's very early days. There's one person who runs the Instagram for us, and they accidentally linked it to their private account. So we might just have to separate that and start a new one. But it's a private Instagram, so obviously you have to request to follow, so you can kind of get a sense of maybe who's trying to request access to that. We say message the location, so it's not somewhere that, we're advertising everywhere that we're going to be here. So, if there were to be anything, people couldn't come. And it's kind of, I think there's a bit of a conversation before people start. So at the moment, it's just kind of ensuring that the right people are kind of viewing the content that we're putting out. So we do put stuff on the Instagram about, images of training and stuff, but hopefully it's only people who have kind of got through that first stage of not vetting, but like kind of sense checking as to whether they're the right people for the group, particularly as we do say for trans non-binary people and not allies. So people, hopefully, people kind of know it's not for them, or you might be able to gauge it. But going forward, I'm not sure, and I think it's scary for anyone being an out trans person, I think. I'm not sure how best to kind of protect this group going forwards yet. But so far we've not been met with any challenges, I think, but that's because it is early days. But whether it becomes sort of a rotating location, or whether it becomes a conversation with a pitch that facilitates trans people and it's kind of like private sessions, there are ways of doing it, but that requires, again, support and allyship from cisgender people, funding from cisgender people. So yeah, it's early days. We're thinking about how best to do it, but currently, we're just kind of being quite protective of the digital space, which does also mean it's less accessible because, only people who are on Instagram can really find us. We're trying to do a lot of word of mouth as well. So this is a great opportunity. If you know any trans people who want to play, tell them about us and get in contact. But yeah, currently it's kind of quite inaccessible, which we do recognise as well. But we'll try and think about what to do about that.
It's interesting because on the way here, I read a few articles about kind of allyship to trans communities and trans teams. And a lot of it was like, point 1, be respectful. Point 2, learn people's pronouns. And obviously that is really important, but it feels like what this conversation has really like shined on is actually like, that is a huge part, but actually there's just this like logistical head fuck that like you're going to be constantly dealing with in terms of like administration, like marketing, PR, like practicalities of how and where you play that are all going to take way more headspace and time to figure out.
Can I also just ask for everybody here what the Instagram handle is?
It's, I think, trans and non-binary football Leeds. Is that correct? Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful. We'll get something. Panful, I think would be. We're working on it. It's early days. At the moment,
it is early days, to be fair.
This is just to kind of gauge people's interest, and then eventually it might become a team, it might become a training, it might become something else. But yeah, we'll get something snappier. Is that it?
Trans and non-binary football leagues.
Thank you.
Thank
Do you know, Frank, there's a team in Manchester started by someone called Fran, called Franchester United. So maybe you could move to Manchester and do some kind of like Franchester United thing.
I can vibe with that. I like Where's Wally as well as a name.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Brilliant. Does anybody have, I think we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions. We good? Speak now, forever hold your peace. Okay. Thank you very much to Ingrid, Kaz, and Frank for being here and for having this conversation. It was great. I'm really excited that you made it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank
It's been a
you.
charming chat.
Thank you.